Hey, welcome back! Today I'm looking at another Shakespeare work, the poem A Lover's Complaint. This is one of Shakespeare's narrative poems, and in fact it follows the same meter and rhyme pattern as Lucrece. It was originally published in 1609 as a coda to the sonnets, and often is occasionally published as an end piece to the sonnets now. This might at first be surprising to the casual reader because it's very different from the sonnets, in that it is a narrative poem, in that it is much longer than the sonnets. But actually it was very common to include a complaint poem, the genre of this particular poem, at the end of a collection of sonnets. There are several other examples around Shakespeare's time. A complaint poem is a poem about a young lover who has been jaded or who has been rejected. Frequently this is in the fallen woman theme. The fallen woman is a significant image, both within Shakespeare's day and also later on in the Romantic time period. This is a woman who has fallen to the seduction of a man, only to be left high and dry and in trouble. And that is in fact exactly what this poem is about. Although the majority of scholars still attribute this poem to Shakespeare, there are some people who argue that it actually should belong to someone else, and that the publisher merely tacked it on to the end of the sonnets. There are some linguistic differences between the sonnets and this particular poem, as well as the majority of Shakespeare's other work, particularly in that it contains a whole lot of archaic and Latinate words that Shakespeare doesn't often use. And yet there are still plenty of people who feel pretty comfortable calling this Shakespeare's. Although it definitely stands alone, it also is interesting to examine next to the sonnets, looking at the way the ideas of love and longing and desire and separation that are such important themes within the sonnets play out in this poem. One could also read it along with his other long narrative poems like Lucrece and Venus and Adonis. It also is fun to look at next to the sonnets because, like the sonnets, it has a bit of a twist ending. Most of Shakespeare's sonnets have a quick turning point at the end during that couplet, often with a surprising ending. This poem also has a very surprising last stanza, which we'll touch on in just a moment. It's also interesting within this poem how many different people show up. There's a voice at the very beginning of the poem of a speaker who appears to be observing all of this. This speaker only really shows up at the very beginning of the poem, and we don't know a whole lot about this person. From off a hill whose concave womb reworded a plaintive story from a sistering vale, my spirits to tended this double voice accorded, and down I laid to list the sad tune tale. Ere long espied a fickle maid full pale, tearing of papers, breaking rings a-twain, storming her world with sorrow's wind and rain. It goes on to continue to describe the maiden, and we never really come back to the speaker who is observing this. Why do we step in to a speaker's voice before looking at the story itself? From that point we observe the woman for a while, and then she is interrupted by an older man who steps up to offer her assistance, seeing that she is in some kind of need and distress. And then he sort of fades out of the picture, as the woman merely uses him as a sounding board to tell her story. The majority of her story is a speech by the young man who wooed her and seduced her, and ultimately her response to his wooing. So it's interesting that we have these sort of layers of perspective and voice outside of the story, maybe causing us to pause and reflect on the nature of hearing a story and what it means. Is this something of an artistic commentary within the poem? Much like the artistic commentary within Lucrece, as she examines the tapestry as she's stirring with all of her emotions. So let's look at what actually happens within this poem. The observed young woman is standing by a stream and weeping and filling the water with more water from her tears, which seems sort of fruitless considering how much water is already there. She's also tearing up letters and throwing all these trinkets of love into the stream as she's brokenhearted over this. In comes the old man who sits down to listen to her story and hear what her problem is. And she begins to tell about how there was a handsome young man who really was the stuff. All the young ladies completely swooned over him. And this young woman, although she was not completely immune to his attraction, was pretty tough. She was not going to bow. And although all the other women apparently were succumbing to his seduction, she was not. Finally, he comes up and he gives her a speech. In his speech, he does recognize the fact that he has seduced many women. He's a regular Don Juan. But he says, none of them really meant anything to me. You're the one who truly I have fallen for. Huh, yeah, I believe that. But he goes on to make the point that he didn't truly love them because they were all weak and easily seduced. But it's her resilience and her resistance that ultimately shows him that she's the true one that he needs. He goes on to describe this nun, who has, of course, separated herself from physical pleasure in order to give her love to God. And he says, that's actually not as great as what you were doing, because she was avoiding temptation by blocking herself completely off to it. You, however, have come face to face with temptation and resisted it. Ultimately, I seduced the nun, but I can't get you! And it just shows me that you're the true one, and I truly love you, and you're completely different from everyone else. And as he says this, tears trickle down his cheeks, and it's those tears that ultimately break her will. This said, his watery eyes he did dismount, whose sights till then were levelled on my face, each cheek a river running from a fount, with brinish current downward flowed apace. Oh, how the channel to the stream gave grace, who glazed with crystal gate the glowing roses that flame through water, which their hue encloses. Oh, Father, what a hell of witchcraft lies in the small orb of one particular tear! But with the inundation of the eyes, what rocky heart to water will not wear? What breast so cold that is not warmed here? Oh, cleft effect, cold modesty, hot wrath, both fire from hints and chill extincture hath. So he was able to melt her cold heart away and warm her up to passion. Ultimately, though, she chilled his passion, because after he won her over, he no longer liked her. What do you know? The jerk! Don't mess around with players. But the real kicker is the last stanza. As she comes to the end, she's beating herself up for succumbing to this guy and finally breaking her resolve and getting herself into this situation. She knew better! And yet, here at the end, as she's thinking about his face and his tears, as he was looking at her at that moment, she says, "Oh, that infected moisture of his eye! Oh, that false fire which in his cheek so glowed! Oh, that forced thunder from his heart did fly! Oh, that sad breath his spongy lungs bestowed! Oh, all that borrowed motion seeming owed would yet again betray the fore-betrayed and new pervert a reconciled maid." In other words, if he were standing before me here and did the same act over again, even though I knew it was all an act, I wouldn't be able to help myself. I would just break down under it. Oh, those crafty wiles. It's a really unique little piece of Shakespeare's, and well worth looking over, especially perhaps in the context of studying his sonnets. Thanks for watching. If you want to look back at my other notes over Shakespeare's publications or his sonnets, you can click on one of the links, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.